And we are back here live from the Delta Edmonton South Best of Analytics Conference. Joining me is Meghan Deere from the Localize project. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what it is you do to start?
Well, so I run a business called Localize, and what we do is provide a service to grocery stores that's an on-shelf service that identifies local and regional food. And we do it a little differently because each of our tags has a measurement of how local a product is, and that depends not just on distance but also on ownership and where the jobs got created, where the ingredients came from, sustainability. We really try to index local and try to break through some of those barriers that customers have in identifying truly local, independent, regional food.
Very interesting. So where exactly is your project, or where are you doing these labelings?
So we do it in grocery stores, and in the last 6 months we've actually launched into 62 grocery stores, mostly in southern Alberta, so a lot of Calgarians will recognize it in Calgary Co-op, which was our first big launch, and we've been rolling it out throughout other co-op stores and even Sobeys stores in Alberta for the last 6 months.
All right, so mostly in southern Alberta. Are you guys up in Edmonton or up in northern Alberta at all?
Well, we just launched in a store here in Edmonton in a little organic market called Pangea in downtown Edmonton. And so if anyone in Edmonton wants to check it out, it's at Pangea.
All right, sounds cool. So do you have plans to expand the project a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think we'll be in over 200 grocery stores in the next year, so by mid-2014. We really built it to scale it up and to try to provide a service that grocery stores and consumers are really asking for.
All right. So what role does analytics play in the work that you guys do?
Well, so analytics to me is really about information, and what we do is we take what can be pretty complex information and we present it in a way that consumers can make sense of, and we do it in a way that's credible. And so each of our labels, they have a certain amount of data embedded in them. There's also a QR code on each label. And behind that QR code is a product-specific page about where that product has come from, where the ownership is, all of the sort of unpacking of details. And I think what we do effectively is make it look really easy. And yet, communicating food information is actually sort of an art of taking this big complex stuff and then distilling it down into honest but consumable pieces of information. And so, you know, we have a remarkable layer of data that we're collecting, and that data really is around some invisible businesses in the past. A lot of these food businesses are basically invisible, and we don't have a lot of information about them and how their products move in grocery stores. And we're starting to get some sort of critical mass of information about how consumers perceive and understand those products. And that's very useful in trying to develop small-scale food businesses and making them more viable.
Interesting. So how do you go about collecting that information?
Well, we have a few channels, and the big thing really is that we communicate directly with food businesses. Basically, we are brokering information between a food business and the grocer and the consumer. And so most of that information really goes straight to the source of the food business.
All right. So how did you become involved in this initiative, or how did you get it started?
So I started it because I was a little bit annoyed when I walked into a grocery store and there wasn't anything to tell me where the food was coming from. And the types of systems and regulations that are out there don't do a very good job of telling you where they came from. And I think a country isn't enough. And we need to have more specific, more articulate ways to talk about where food comes from. And it seemed like the easiest way to do that really was the arm's length food businesses. And that's local. They can tell us a story about the food and where it came from and how it was made that no one else can. And certainly everywhere you go, there's local food businesses who, and you know, I want to give my money to people I can recognize too. And so this is about giving people the tools to sort of act upon their values.
All right. So what do you think the biggest changes that you've seen come about as a result of this project are, as a result of the information that you're putting out there?
Yeah, well, the traditional way of looking at the idea of local has been black and white. It's either local or it's not. And I know the regulatory environment with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is grocery stores can only call something local if it comes from 50 kilometers away. It's very restrictive. And I think we've introduced sort of a better idea of saying there's value in regional independent food businesses, and there's value in talking about these in better ways. And I think one of the most interesting things is people use the word localize now to talk about local food, and they're more willing to talk about the gray area, past that 50 kilometers, past 100, past 300, and to really talk about that point of origin of food.
All right, very, very interesting. So, as far as the future of this initiative, where do you see it going?
Well, we're working hard to scale it up, and so I'd love to walk into any grocery store and see a label that tells me where that product came from. And certainly I know that we're growing really quickly in that grocery side. And I'd love to see where else we can take this to more effectively communicate food information. And also, grocery stores haven't been a traditional way to communicate food information. And so there's a lot of sort of fun in experimenting with how we can do this and how that venue can be really effective at communicating with consumers to make decisions that matter to them.
For sure. It's very, very important to communicate to people where they make the purchases, because so many decisions are made in the store, I think.
Yeah.
So do you have plans to expand beyond Alberta, or?
Yeah, we'll be moving into Saskatchewan and BC in the coming months, and so that'll be the first jump we made across provincial lines. And so with that comes a whole bunch of work too. Like, we built that index, which is very much Alberta focused, and so we have to sort of go back to the consumers in these new places and figure out how to index local in that environment. And it's a very values-based index too, and so there's sort of finding that practical level of what's practical and what's embedded in sort of local values, and finding that and building it around that.
So when you say a values-based index, what do you mean by that?
Well, the idea of local food is really based on people's personal values.
Okay.
And so we addressed this as scientifically as you can around a value, a personal value, and that was to basically survey almost 1,000 people in a study and have them basically force them to rank and weight the different attributes of what was important about local, and so interestingly, what came out of that was how we would weight that index and how we would make sure that we included the right information that went into that number out of 10, and so we'll have to replicate that as we grow, and I think that's important because we're taking into consideration context and so forth.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the webcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Very much appreciate it. So have yourself a good rest of the conference.
I
Michelle,
will.
We'll see you around here.
Excellent.
Join the conversation next year as more cities become data-driven. Become a community partner. Contact us at info@abctech.ca.